Our lives revolve around plans. We have dreams, we have goals, we have family and loved ones, places we want to go, things we want to do. And sometimes life is cut short and we never achieve those things. So what happens when life is abruptly interrupted? What happens to all those hopes and dreams? To all those feelings and ambitions? Do they just vanish? Is it possible for someone's spirit to linger after death, waiting to transcend into the afterlife until something is completed? Maybe it's a message to a loved one, a secret that needs to be revealed. What happens to a life that is violently taken? What if a person's spirit can't move on until their killer is caught? And what happens when the investigators have no idea where to even start looking for that person? Does the ghost of that person step in to help? Today's story involves disturbing subject matter, so please take care of yourself while listening. Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path. How to get away with murder. Firstly, you have to make sure that there's no way to connect you to said murder. No fingerprints, no hair follicle, no DNA. You need an alibi. Make sure that no one can place you at the scene of the crime. But mostly, when people do murder, they don't necessarily go into the act with a thought-out, meticulously mapped-out plan. Normally, it's a rash decision, something that happens quickly. And usually, these are highly emotional events, so even if planned out, adrenaline and emotions tend to override logic. So what do you do next? You try to make it look like the crime never happened in the first place. In 2007, a woman named Jocelyn Ernest was found deceased in her home. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. The gun was one that her husband had purchased for her. She had left a suicide note behind, stating that she couldn't deal with the stress caused from a massive amount of debt that she and her husband now had because their large home lost its value during the market crash. Her husband, Wesley, confirmed this with the police. But her friend's mother and therapist all told investigators a very different story. Jocelyn was not depressed at all. In fact, she had been texting with friends at the time of her death and was actually terrified of Wesley. Also, Jocelyn wrote everything out by hand, and the suicide note was typed. As it would turn out, Jocelyn didn't have any debt connected to the house. A judge had ordered that the debt belonged to Wesley because the couple were going through a divorce. The police then started to notice little things that pointed to a staged crime scene. The thermostat was set too high. Her dog had been unfed and left in its crate. Not a single computer connected to her was used to type or print out her suicide letter, and that paper just so happened to have 2 partial thumbprints on it that just so happened to belong to Wesley, who had also borrowed a friend's truck and changed its brand new tires and did so under a fake name. Wesley, my guy, it's not looking good for you. But the biggest giveaway that he had killed her and staged the scene to look like a suicide, or at least tried to, was that her body had been moved, and the gun was laying on the wrong side of her body. There are a few ways that people will stage a murder scene, and it's almost always to shift the blame of the death to someone else. People will stage murders to look like suicides, like in this case, leaving forged notes behind and positioning weapons to make it look like the person took their own life. But these people don't have an understanding on in-depth forensic investigations or what they look for. Sometimes a person will stage it as a robbery, scattering items across the room, pulling out drawers and dumping their contents, but then nothing valuable is ever taken. They may also stage it to look like a sexual assault happened, stripping the victim and exposing them, to give the idea of a very different perpetrator. And other times, they will stage it to look like a completely different event. The person drowned or fell, carbon monoxide, something to give the impression that the death was completely unintentional. In criminology and behavioral profiling, criminals who weaponize fire post-offense are categorized under two highly specific subsets of crime concealment staging. These individuals are distinct from serial arsonists. They don't burn for the thrill of the flame, but rather they use fire as a tactical, desperate tool of deception. Usually, the perpetrator is somehow connected to the victim, or sometimes even to the location, and they're split into two very different categories. One is the planner. They may knock over a candle as a way to give them time to leave the scene of the crime and be seen elsewhere, and therefore establishing an alibi. Or they are panicked and start dumping flammable fluids everywhere to set fire to the place quickly due to fear of being caught. To a killer, fire is the ultimate accomplice. It's swift, brutal, and seemingly total. When the offender strikes a match over a crime scene, they believe that they're burning away their identity, their footprints, and their guilt. They think that they're leaving the police with nothing but ashes. But fire is a terrible keeper of secrets, and it leaves an exact chemical trail of panic. And sometimes, when the smoke clears, it clears just enough to let the dead speak. Teresita Basa was born in the Philippines in 1929. She was the only child of Pedro Basa, a prominent lawyer, and his wife. She had graduated from Assumption College in Manila and immigrated to the United States as a young woman. Her life was heavily influenced by music, and she eventually earned a master's degree in music from the Indiana University. However, she found it very hard to find a job in the music industry, so she settled in Seattle, and in 1977, she was working at the Edgewater Hospital as a respiratory therapist. In her spare time, she taught piano lessons from her fashionable apartment. She was still in school, earning a doctorate in music, and was in the process of also writing a book. She had made friends with many other Filipino immigrants and had a large friend group that she spoke with frequently. They described her as polite and reserved, exceptionally dedicated to her job. She didn't drink and was overall happy with her quiet, uncomplicated life. On February 21st of 1977, Teresita was on the phone with Ruth Loeb, a co-worker and friend from Edgewater Hospital. The conversation lasted around half an hour, and during the call, Teresita mentioned that a male friend was coming over to her apartment that evening. She didn't provide a name or any other details about who this person was. Around 8:45 that evening, Marid and Catherine Naz, neighbors living in Teresita's building on 2740 North Pine Grove Avenue in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, could smell smoke coming from the hallway. They notified a janitor who alerted the other residents and called the fire department. From outside, a terrified neighbor saw dark, dense black smoke billowing from Teresita's apartment. The fire department arrived and broke down the door to Unit 15B on the 15th floor, Teresita's unit. The fire inside was mostly contained to the living room and hadn't had a chance to spread elsewhere. In the middle of the living room was a burning mattress with a hump underneath it. When firefighters lifted the mattress, they found a naked woman's body underneath. A butcher knife was embedded in the middle of her chest. The woman was identified as 47-year-old Teresita Basa. Her clothing was scattered beside her body, also under the mattress, and her genitals were exposed as if she had been sexually assaulted. However, later, the autopsy would prove no proof that a sexual assault had occurred, confirming that the scene had been staged to look like it had. And it was also determined that the fire had been intentionally set, although her cause of death was a deep stab wound. The apartment had been ransacked. However, it seemed as though nothing had really been taken. Police interviewed her friends and coworkers, but no one could think of anyone who would ever want to hurt her. Teresita, by all accounts, was very well liked and had many friends. The only clue that investigators had to go on was a note in Teresita's handwriting, which said, "Get theater tickets for A.S." Who was A.S.? No one knew. However, after speaking with Ruth Loeb, the police suspected that A.S. was the man that Teresita was meeting that evening, and that meant he was probably her killer. Everyone had also reported that she hadn't been dating anybody. Eventually, her body was flown back to the Negros Island in the Philippines for burial. Detective Joseph Stachula and his partner Lee Eplin were assigned to her case, and for 6 months, they had no leads, no clues aside from the note, and nowhere to go. Her case just sat cold, that is, until they received a very strange tip that sounded too out there to have been real. But as it turns out, it was. A surgeon named Jose Chua came to the police station with a crazy story about how he knew who Teresa's killer was. He reported that he believed Teresa had been in contact with his wife, Remy Chua, after her death. Both Chua and his wife had worked with Teresa at Edgewater Hospital, but he himself had never met Teresa, only his wife had been close with her. Shortly after Teresa's death, Remy started having these horrific nightmares, detailed dreams about Teresa's murder. This went on for weeks, but just like with most dreams, when Remy woke in the morning, she started to forget everything that happened in those dreams. At first, the doctor thought that his wife was just very deeply affected by the death and murder of Teresa, and these dreams were a form of her grief, and this was just a very normal way that the mind processes said grief. However, the dreams didn't stop. Things just became worse. One day, Remy is napping on the couch, and Dr. Chua notices her tossing and turning, like she was in distress, and assumes she's having another nightmare. Remy then starts mumbling in Tagalog, her native language, which she rarely spoke, and her voice, it doesn't sound like her voice. And she says, "Doctor, I need your help. The man who murdered me is still at large." It's almost like she's in a trance, and Dr. Chua is very shocked by this. This doesn't sound like his wife. So he asks the voice, "Who are you?" And Remy replies, "I am Teresita Basa." When Remy wakes up, she has no memory of what just happened, and Dr. Chua is understandably shaken, but again, he thinks that this is just some strange manifestation of his wife's grief. But it happens again, and again. Another time, Remy is sleeping and once again falls into this trance, and the voice of Teresa tells Chua who kills her and tells him that he has nothing to be afraid of. The voice is basically pleading for his help to catch her killer. Now, Dr. Chua is a man of science, and he knows how out there this sounds. He doesn't think that any police or investigator is going to believe him if he just shows up and says, "Hey, this ghost voice told me who her killer is." No way will he be taken seriously. He's a doctor, after all, and he doesn't think that this will go good for him, so he says nothing to anyone about this. But then his wife goes into another trance, almost like she's being possessed, and the voice asks him why he hasn't gone to the police yet. And he tells the voice, how can I be taken seriously with just a name given to me by a ghost? I need to have some sort of proof that this is the person, or no one is going to believe me. I need to give them something more than just a name. So the voice of Teresa tells Dr. Chua that the man who murdered her took some jewelry from her home after he killed her, a pearl ring and a jade pendant. The voice also gives him the phone numbers of 4 family members who can all confirm that these belonged to her. This seems good enough for Chua, and really what else can he do? Maybe if he goes to the police, his wife will stop being possessed by this ghost of her dead friend. So he goes down to the police station and he sits with the detectives on Teresa's case and is like, "Look, I know how crazy this is going to sound, but the ghost of Teresa has been taking over my wife's body and is giving me all the information about how she was murdered, who murdered her, and how she can prove he murdered her. His name is Alan Showery." The detectives are kind of baffled by this, but they're going to follow up on this lead because, firstly, it's a lead and the case has been dry for months. Also, because as crazy as it seems, this information already lines up with some information they already had. Alan Showery matches the initials written on the note found in Teresa's apartment, and he also works at the Edgewater Hospital. Teresa knew him, and when police had done their first interviews with her co-workers and people she knew, they had already spoken with him. So the police go to his apartment where he lives with his girlfriend, Yanka Kalmak, to question him again, and he talks pretty freely with them. Over the course of their conversations with Showery, the details of his story changes a few times. First, he tells them that he was having some money issues, and Teresa wanted to help him, so she was giving him some odd jobs. She had asked him to come over and fix her TV. At first, the story was that he was supposed to go over, but that Teresita called him last minute and told him that she didn't need him anymore. Later, the story changed, and he claimed that he did go over, but after inspecting the TV, he realized he didn't have the right tools or parts to fix it, so he would have to come back later to finish the job. And apparently, when the officers talk to his girlfriend Yenka, she tells them that he has no idea about technical things and definitely doesn't have the skills to fix a TV. Police hear this and they ask Yenka if she has seen Showery with a pearl ring or a jade pendant, and she tells them yes, she has them, that Showery gave them to her as a late Christmas gift. Armed with this information, Showery is confronted by investigators, and he immediately cracks and confesses to the entire thing. According to him, he did go over to the apartment under the pretense of fixing her TV. He was having money troubles, so he attacked her, rendered her unconscious, and stabbed her so that he could rob her place. He left with less than $30 and a few pieces of her jewelry. He removed her clothing to stage the scene to look like a sexual assault, and then set fire to cover his tracks. Later, Showery's lawyer, William Swano, he tries to get the charges dropped. I mean, how could the prosecutors have any probable cause? Their lead came from a supposed ghost. Who was going to take that seriously? Never, to his knowledge, had anyone ever been arrested because of some sort of supernatural vision. The lawyer claimed that the arrest and charges were illegal without probable cause. And a ghost wasn't enough because, after all, they couldn't put a voice of a ghost on the witness stand. And I mean, yes, it's strange how the tip came to the investigators, but the supernatural components isn't what made them look into Showery. It didn't matter. The police had a duty to follow up on the tip regardless of how out there it was. And after that, the evidence against Showery just naturally developed, leading to an actual confession. It wasn't as if a ghost was helping them every step of the way. Not to mention, Showery had already been on the police radar before the tip even came in. They had interviewed him prior to speaking with Dr. Chua, so it wasn't like he was a random person to the investigation. And Showery had freely cooperated with them. So Alan Showery went to trial, but the jury was deadlocked, leading to a mistrial. There were those who didn't agree with a ghost being the lead that led to his conviction. A second trial was being arranged, and while waiting, Showery took a plea deal for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 14 years, but would only serve 6 of his full sentence, and was released in 1983. Because he had abruptly changed his mind while waiting for the second trial, there are some who think that perhaps the vengeful spirit of Teresita Basa gave him a little prison visit and nudged him into the plea deal. Since his release, he has cut all connection with Yanko and the child that they shared together, and there's no public records of him. He sort of just slipped into animicity, never to speak about the case again. Now, as odd as this may sound, this isn't the only case in which someone was convicted of a murder with a little help from a ghost. Earlier in this season of Down the Crooked Path, we also covered the story of the Greenbrier ghost, Zona Hester Shue. She was found dead in her home, and her death was originally ruled as heart failure. Later, Zona's mother claimed to have been visited by her ghost, and the spirit revealed that her new husband, Esmeralda Edward Shue, had broken her neck because he was angry about dinner. The mother convinced the local prosecutor to exhume the body, and a proper autopsy revealed a crushed windpipe, confirming that she was strangled. The husband was convicted of the murder, making this the only legal case in the U.S. history where a ghost's testimony directly triggered a conviction. In another episode, we covered Maria Martin. In Suffolk's England, a young woman named Maria Martin disappeared after running away to elope with a man named William Corder. Corder claimed that she was alive and well in another town. Months later, Maria's stepmother claimed that she had reoccurring nightmares, where Maria's ghost pointed to a specific spot beneath the floorboards of a local landmark called the Red Barn. Driven by the dreams, the family searched the Red Barn and found Maria's remains buried exactly where the stepmother indicated. Corder fled but was eventually captured, tied, and executed for the murder. I mean, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, am I right? But in both of these cases, there may not have been anything supernatural happening at all. Some believe that Zona's mother had been suspicious of her daughter's husband, as had many of the other neighbors and town folks. She needed some way, though, to bring attention to him, and perhaps she found it through a ghost story. And with Maria, well, rumor has it that stepmommy Dearest was also involved with Corder, and when he never made good on his promises to her, she revealed his truth about Maria. If she knew what he had done to Maria all along, what better way to rat him out without implicating herself than with a prophetic dream?
Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast, you're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you.
Murder cases with an element of the supernatural dot our history. The Devil Made Me Do a case was covered by Ed and Lorraine Warren, in which a young man murdered his employer while supposedly possessed by the devil. Or how about the Fisher Ghost, also known as the Camden Gully Ghost, which is a famous murder in Australia in 1826, where a ghost allegedly solved its own crime. After a wealthy farmer named Frederick Fisher vanished, a local man claimed Fisher's ghost appeared on a fence and pointed towards a marshy creek. The police searched the exact spot, found Fisher's hidden body, and subsequently arrested his business partner, George Worrell, who confessed to the murder before his execution. Think about what actually happens, though, inside a dark, quiet room when your brain starts to turn against you. Psychologists look at these stories and they don't see ghosts. They see the human mind breaking under massive pressure. Our brains are essentially highly advanced pattern machines. They pick up on tiny details all day long. A nervous glance from a neighbor, a weird comment from your coworker, a patch of dirt in the woods that looks perhaps a bit too lush. You might consciously ignore these clues because the truth is too terrifying to face. But your subconscious mind keeps working. It connects the dots even while you sleep. When that pressure builds too much, the brain releases it. It forces a breakthrough. It creates a dream or a vivid hallucination, and it packages that logical deduction into the image of a ghost. So a person may not necessarily be lying when they say they saw a spirit. Their mind just chose a supernatural wrapper to deliver a brutal, real-world realization. But what about the killers themselves? What happens when a suspect suddenly confesses because they claim the victim has been haunting a cell? That, my friends, is the weight of complete isolation. You lock a person in a small dark room with nothing but their own guilt, and the distractions disappear and the adrenaline drops. That is when the mind starts to play tricks. A heavy conscience can easily project a victim's face onto a concrete wall. It becomes a form of psychological torture, built entirely by their own remorse. They confess because it's the only way that makes the screaming in their head stop. We also have to look at the world that these people have lived in and the era, the exact dirt beneath their feet. Because a ghost story never just happens in a vacuum. They grow directly out of the culture of its time. Think about the late 1800s, the Victorian era. Spiritualism was absolutely everywhere. People were regularly sitting in dark rooms holding hands and talking to the dead. It was a massive cultural moment. So, if a woman in 1897 claims that her daughter's ghost came back to name her killer, the community doesn't immediately mock her. Instead, they listen and believe her. In that specific slice of history, a spirit is a completely valid source of truth. If that same event happened today, however, the reaction is totally different. The culture dictates what we allow ourselves to see and what we allow ourselves to believe. But there is something darker to this as well. Sometimes a ghost story is the only way a community can process a horrific tragedy. A brutal murder tears a small town apart. It creates a massive amount of fear and anxiety. If the police can't solve the crime, the helplessness sets in. And so, the folklore starts to shift, and the story transforms. The ghost becomes a symbol of the ultimate justice. The town invents or amplifies the spirit because they desperately need to believe that no one truly gets away with murder. The supernatural element becomes a coping mechanism for a community dealing with pure unresolved trauma. So where does this leave us with Teresita Basa? Well, it brings us right back to that 15th floor apartment in Chicago, to Remy Chua, the worker who spoke Teresita's voice. Her doctor husband may not have been so wrong about it being some form of grief manifesting. When you strip away the supernatural headlines, the psychology and the culture tell the real story. Remy Chua worked in the same hospital as Teresita. She knew the same people. She knew Alan Showery. Her brain was likely collecting those tiny, mismatched details for months. The weird tension and the missed tickets, the sudden disappearance of a quiet colleague, Remy's subconscious did what the police hadn't done yet. It put the pieces together. Then you have Showery himself, a man trapped in a jail cell, facing a second trial. The culture around him was already buzzing with the story of a ghost seeking revenge. He knew what people were saying. In the dead of night, isolated by his own guilt, that narrative could have very well become his reality, and the pressure broke him. Really, the ghost of Teresita Basa didn't need to physically haunt that jail cell. The human mind did all the heavy lifting. Thank you for walking down this crooked path with me. Let the flashlight guide you through the dark, let the clues show the way, and let the truth find its voice. Until next week, I'm Amanda Joy.